Well, thanks for doing that video, Ryan.
Yeah, I was happy to. This will be a little bit more unedited, so there might be a bit more stuttering.
Okay, Ryan, so you recently moved here to Denver. You've been coming from a few months. So could you tell a little about where you moved from and where you studied before becoming a professor?
Yeah, so I went to undergrad at St. Olaf College in Minnesota. I studied economics and statistics, and then I decided I really enjoyed statistics. Like I guess I said in the video, I think it's a really good way to learn more about our world. And so I went to grad school in biostatistics at the University of Iowa, where I spent 5 years to get my PhD. And now I've been here for like 5 months as an assistant professor. So, yeah.
Okay, thanks, Ryan. So we had 2 questions come in earlier today, so we'll start with those, and then Sawyer's going to pass the mic. So if you have a question, raise your hand, and Sawyer will come over. Is that how you want to do it, Sawyer? Does that sound good? Okay, so the first question, it's a tough one. Why do so many atheists discredit faith when they acknowledge that science cannot answer every question?
Okay, that is a very good question, and I definitely can't speak for all atheists, probably not even many of them, but as far as my experience goes, I think I've generally met like 2 camps. One camp are people who are painting a pretty broad brush with that, with discrediting faith, and they're kind of saying maybe if you replace the word with faith with blind faith, I actually would agree with that. I think if people have blind faith in anything, that can be a little bit dangerous, and I think as Christians we're not called to have blind faith. As you said in the sermon, we're supposed to constantly be learning new things about God, and using our mind when we're doing that. And we're instead of having blind faith, we're called to have faith with our eyes wide open, constantly seeking new information about God. And so, I guess that would be the first thing I would say is blind faith. Yeah, it does have a lot of problems, absolutely. And then the other camp I would say are people who grew up in the church and maybe don't believe. Had lost their faith at some point. I do know a lot of people in that camp, in my profession especially, and I think, honestly, I think it's the same thing. I think they had faith in a God that wasn't exactly, their understanding of that God wasn't exactly true, but they had like maybe 100% certain in this God, and they thought that God was going to act a certain way in this particular time, and then God didn't act in that way, and so that kind of, when you have that kind of full 100% belief in something and then it's not true, that can really, I think, take the rug out from under you. And honestly, I think that's how a lot of people do lose their faith. And so, yeah, I think blind faith is a pretty big culprit there.
Sure, that's good. Okay, the second question, and it got cut off, so I'm going to interpret. Hopefully I interpret it right. If it was you, you can raise your hand and yell at me. So, talking about my message, that I talked about how humans are interpreting both books, nature and the Bible. How do we ever make a decision then if we are always seeing, and I'm going to try to figure out what they want to conclude with. Through a human interpretation. That was your question. Thank you, Leah. So if we just have this human interpretation, how can we ever move forward?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely difficult. I think just because we have uncertainty in our beliefs, I mean, I definitely have uncertainty in some of my beliefs, a lot of them. But I think just because that uncertainty exists doesn't mean it has to paralyze us in our decisions. I mean, scientists too have to make decisions in the presence of uncertainty. And to quote, I guess, Geddy Lee, for any Rush fans, if you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice. So there's really no avoiding having to make decisions. But yeah, so I do think that that uncertainty is kind of, it's tied with the idea of discernment, and I think I want to be careful here because it might sound like I'm saying everyone should question all of their beliefs all the time. That's not what I'm saying, but I do think that if you have a belief, it's okay to ask questions about it. Actually, I would encourage it if your belief is grounded in truth. How do we know, right, if our beliefs are grounded in truth? Well, I think if your belief is grounded in truth, then it will cause you to become more wondrous about that belief. It'll cause you to be curious, and you'll want to ask more questions about it, just because I guess that's one of my beliefs. But I also, if the belief that you have is grounded maybe not in truth, in falsehoods, I think that will cause you to doubt, and it's okay to ask those questions too. That kind of walking that line is discernment.
That's good. I like that you quote Rush. I don't know if you knew this, but Ryan's been playing bass a couple times up here. Rush, it's a good man. Good man.
It's a great band.
Okay, so I'm going to kind of open up the floor now. If you have a question for Ryan, or if it's something for me. If it's something for the weeks in coming, we might write it down and save it. But if you guys have a question, just raise your hand right now. Anybody have a question? Got one right here in the back.
Actually come up to me and ask why I believe that we were created, or the earth was created in one day. And my only response could be, a day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as a day unto God. What would you say? What's a better answer?
That is a good question. Do you want to start that one? I'm not an evolutionary biologist, so I might have to
geologist.
Or a geologist.
Do you want to tackle that one? We are going to hit that straight on next week. If you come back to next week.
So I like to, I guess, think about in the past, it's really hard to know anything about specific things that happened in the past. I mean, we try to do that with history, and it's tough because you have to put together a lot of primary sources, and a lot of historians will constantly talk about what happened at a given time as in terms of what's most likely to have happened, given all of the primary source data and all of this stuff. And as a statistician, whenever I hear the phrase "most likely," I get a little bit, something goes off, because if you use it a lot, then it might not be true. Because if you keep saying this word probably, this person was probably like this because they wrote like this, and then they were most likely like this, okay, there's way too much uncertainty there at this point. And so anything in the past really is shrouded in uncertainty. And I don't really claim to know how things started, but I don't know. I think it's okay not to know.
It's good. Thanks, Ryan. Any other questions from the audience tonight? Bold one. Okay, right up here in the front.
We got Jess.
Jess in the back, and then Catherine up in front next. Thanks, Sawyer.
So isn't spirituality a form of science? Because if God has a plan and you go through some trials in your life and then later you get to help people through their trials, isn't that part of science? We have a scientific method, we see something happens, we create a law, and we say, now there's gravity.
Does that make sense, Ryan?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
So I think, let me think about this.
I think what you're talking about is what you're defining science as. If it's knowledge that we can learn from, as a very broad term, like interpreting the word science as knowledge, I think you're probably right, Jess.
Yeah, I guess when I think of science, I think of the scientific method more so, and like setting up an experiment, or just observe. It's things that can be measured over time and repeated. Experiments that can be repeated. That's the best. That's what the scientific method, at least. And I don't know if I've ever applied that to my spirituality, and I feel a little bit uncomfortable doing that, because honestly, it feels like a little bit like I'd be testing God, and I don't like to put myself in that position.
Okay. Any other questions? Oh, Catherine. We have Catherine up here.
With different reproductive technology and CRISPR and gene editing, I feel like a lot of times people are accused of playing God. Do you think that there's a point where we're not supposed to be moving forward in that, where we're like, if that's the language of God in our DNA, like, is there a point where we should not be trying to push that?
That is a really, really good question. I don't claim to know that answer.
Deep.
That's
I think one of the most fascinating things, in any language that you hear, it's always saying playing God. Atheists will say, are we playing God? I'm like, why do you care, so that's just a fascinating observation I've noticed. They always talk about playing God.
I mean, I do think there's a definite sense that we need to be incredibly careful with doing it, and I think a lot of people should be a part of this conversation. Theologists should be part of the conversation, ethicists. And I think that is going to be the big question of this generation, essentially, is how do we handle that situation? If we can cure like a really bad disease using that technology for good, is that okay? And I don't know. But I think it's worth talking about.
You should ask that question again when Dr. Grotice is here, because he's a professor of philosophy and ethics.
Which week is that?
That'll be week 4? Okay. I think, yeah.
So you talked about studying uncertainties.
Yep.
As a Christian, we do have uncertainties, but what as a Christian are we certain of?
So let's re-say that for the recording. It might just be in a dead spot right there. We have some dead spots.
You want me to repeat?
Yeah, could you repeat that?
So you
Thanks,
talked
Dad.
about the science of uncertainty, and I agree with that. And you said as a Christian there are uncertainties, but are there certainties that we have as kind of a minimum core as believers?
I have some, yeah. I definitely have some things or some ways God has revealed himself to me that is really hard to communicate to others, and I'm not sure it's a universal thing that I can say I believe in, that everyone else will also believe that thing, who's also a Christian, but God has definitely revealed himself in my life in ways that have made me certain about the fact that he cares deeply about me and my life. So yeah, there are certainties, but there are also a lot of uncertainties, especially when it comes to about my understanding about God. I feel like it changes week by week, and I think that's okay. Like, I am uncertain about a lot of who God is, and I think that's still okay. I do believe that Jesus came down and Jesus was God, because I've had a relationship with him. It's hard to communicate that in like an apologetic way to someone who might be an atheist, other than the fact that it is a very personal experience for me.
Any other questions? I have one, if I can jump in.
Yep.
So in this book that I was talking about, Francis Collins, the geneticist, says, is mathematics, this is a quote from him, is mathematics, along with DNA, another language of God? So my question to you is, do you believe that math points us to God, and if so, how?
Yeah, I think that's I've always thought about math as kind of this interesting entity because it's a universal language. Everyone in the world, no matter what language they speak, can agree on fundamental principles of math. It'll resonate with everybody. It'll resonate, if aliens exist, it'll resonate with them too. And I think it almost goes beyond, it's different than genetic or DNA. It's a different language because it's not just for life. It's not just for living organisms. I think even if life didn't exist, the area of a circle would be pi r squared. Like, it's a different way. It's a different language because it even transcends life itself. So yeah, I mean, I think it could be thought of that way. It's a cool way of kind of discovering objective truth and communicating it across any kind of really all creation.
Any other ones?
I know Pastor Matt had mentioned in his sermon about a lot of the scientists doubt the existence of God. As you, in your job, do you experience other professors who know that you're a Christian and kind of argue with you about your Christianity and try to disprove different things about that? I just find that fascinating.
Yes, that's another really good question. Since I'm fairly early in my career, it hasn't happened much. We'll see if maybe my colleagues see this video, and you might feel differently in a little while. But I guess I can say throughout grad school, I've had a lot of conversations with my fellow the people who are also in my program, a lot of whom were agnostic or are agnostic and or atheist, and I think there definitely is that idea of, you know, how can you believe in this this concept of God? And I honestly love those conversations because I do have answers. I've thought a lot about that, so I do have answers, and I feel like I can communicate it in ways that people can understand relatively well in terms of uncertainty. Because I think one thing about our belief in science that a lot of professors, believe are people of science, you really need to have measurable and repeatable experiments to learn stuff there, and we just don't have a measurable, repeatable way to learn about whether God exists or not. At least I haven't heard of one. And as I said earlier, if there is a way to do it, I'd still be hesitant to do that because, like I said, I feel weird about testing God that way.
Thanks. Kane, do you have a question?
Yeah, so when you have those conversations, what are the most compelling answers that you've given? Like, do you know a certain theme that when you're really being pressed hard that gets kind of an aha reaction from your colleagues in your grad school program?
Yeah, I guess it's kind of along those same lines of just saying, hey, we don't have a good way of scientifically figuring out whether God exists. And what do we do as scientists if we don't have good data going into that kind of decision whether God exists or not? And if you don't have good data, you are going to be uncertain. You're going to have to take a leap of faith one way or the other. I think that kind of, at least with my colleagues, because we talk so much about data and about how we come to use data in our decisions, that actually does go a long way. Because it really makes them think like, okay, yeah, that's true. There is uncertainty there, and like I said earlier, it's okay that there's uncertainty. It doesn't have to paralyze us.
Stephanie?
Yeah. Okay. So I don't know, did you mention if you had always been Christian, or did you go through sort of phases, or?
I did not mention. I grew up Christian. I have, as a lot of Christians I think have, gone through phases of that where I maybe did not, where I doubted a lot. I think that's one of the things I guess I struggled with through my program a little bit, is this idea of uncertainty and doubt and how that can be okay with belief, because belief is talked about a lot in Scripture as being very, like, the most important thing, right? Belief in John is the only way to salvation, belief in Jesus. But I think that's still so general, and how do I put this? I think it's definitely okay in our world. I encourage doubt to exist, and just because we live in a very noisy world, everyone's yelling at you to believe something essentially, and so it's good to doubt. And I guess I think it took some time in grad school really devoted to just reconciling that idea of doubt with belief, and it's okay to be uncertain because that really means your eyes are open, and that's a good thing.
Okay. Yeah, so I was kind of curious if, when you were going through that, like where, I don't know, was it like a moment, or how did you feel like you came back to this level of certainty where it was enough for you that, like, you're like, okay, well, this is the p-value I need to believe that, this is what I'm going to go with? It was not.
This is a physics PhD. Right?
It was not me. It was nothing to do with it wasn't an epiphany I had. It was just God working in my life. I experienced that. And at that point, I was like, oh, okay, you are out there. And you are working in my life. And so I do think everyone has those stories. Sometimes the aha moment is just figuring that out and realizing that God was actually working in these moments.
Yeah, if I can jump in. It's a story, I mean, I've shared this analogy lots of times, so if you've been here before, you've heard it. But with faith, it does say in the scriptures that you're saved through faith. But then Jesus also said the faith of a mustard seed can move mountains. So what he's saying is, yes, you want to have more faith, but it's not the substance of your faith or the amount of faith that saves you, it's the object of your faith. Because, this is the analogy, if you're falling off the Grand Canyon, falling off a cliff, and you're like, I'm going to die, and you see a branch, you're not going to say, could this branch hold me? Is it strong enough to hold my weight, especially with gravity pulling down on me? And you can tell me what the equation is for that. I don't remember from physics. Now I'm falling down. Should I grab this or not? I'm not sure if it can hold me or not, so I'm just not going to. No, you're going to reach out and you're going to grab that branch. And you're going to and if the branch is strong enough, it doesn't matter how strong your faith is in the branch. If you just had a little bit of faith that maybe this branch could save me, it will save you if the branch is strong enough. So that's why it's more about the object of your faith than necessarily the amount of faith you have. So that's why it's okay to doubt and have questions and have uncertainty.
Good question.
I honed in on that question a little bit, sorry. I'm a preacher.
As a scientist, you have to be open to the revelations that science comes up with. Like Matt has said, we have moments of disproving our past discoveries. So are you, as a Christian, open to discovering that you don't believe the right thing?
Yes.
How do you sleep at night?
I mean, it makes for interesting dreams. Anything's possible. No, I'm just kidding. So do you have a specific thing you're wondering about? Like what I'm uncertain, like?
I mean, I feel like every Christian wakes up one day and they're like, wow, I don't really know if God exists. My mom died, or, those moments where it's like the faith-rocking moments. Would you be okay with deciding God doesn't have a big enough answer for my question?
At one point in my life, yeah, I went through that. And I think I did think that. Thankfully, I eventually realized that the belief I had before that about God was off, and I was wrong. I was very certain that God should act a certain way, and He didn't. And it did rock. That does happen, I think. But hopefully, as long as it. In my case, at least, it kind of humbled me. It made me realize I was putting God in my own box, and I wanted Him to act a certain way, and I couldn't understand why He wouldn't. And then I just realized, I'm not the master of the universe. I don't know what's best. Why was I expecting why was I throwing my own will onto God's will? And it made me a lot more humble in that regard. Like now, I think the most important prayer that I pray is "Your will be done," part of the Lord's Prayer, and that's what's most important. If that happens, and it's my will, it's God's will that I die tomorrow or something, I'm okay with that because that's God's will.
That's the first rule of theology: God is God, and you are not.
Yeah, good one.
But yeah, we all have to learn it though. It's hard to learn. Okay, maybe two more questions.
I have a question on the probability of coincidences in your life. I don't know what comment you could make about fate and coincidences in your life, and is that 100% of God working in your life, or
Are coincidences
are there coincidences in your life that yes, you know they're God, and maybe you might also think they're not really God. It's just a coincidence. You have any comment you might make about
Sure, yeah. There's a really famous statistics problem. In any room, I don't know how many people are in here, maybe, I don't know.
Oh, I've heard this before.
Yeah, what do you think the chances are any two people in this room have the same birthday? Sawyer is correct. I mean, it's very, very likely that two of you have the same exact birthday, just out of a matter of pure coincidence. And the reason is sure, it seems like it might be 1 in 365, maybe 2 in 365, because that's how many days of the year there are, but the number of comparisons we're doing is however many people there are in here choose 2. So it's a lot of permutations there, and coincidences do happen all the time. So I do think it's important. God does work in coincidences, absolutely, but God works in all of the experiences that you have, I think. Especially if we're coming at it from a scientific perspective, I think God works in the randomness and in the noise of our everyday experience. Like if there's if there is science always has uncertainty about a given most given problems, and God, I think, works in the stochasticity there, the randomness.
It's a fancy word. Fancy word you learned tonight. Yeah, one last question, and then we'll wrap up.
Okay.
It's kind of a follow-up to what you had said earlier about it's hard to prove the existence of God because you don't want to be like testing God or whatever, but I'm from the state of Arizona, and you look at the Grand Canyon, you had mentioned in your sermon, what are the arguments that some of your peers could make, looking at that and saying that was the Big Bang Theory produced something like that? How could they look on the beauty of the Grand Canyon and not know that there's a God?
That's a tough question. I mean, I agree. It's beautiful. The mountains here, every day I look out. I mean, I'm still new here. I don't know if this will get old, but I see them. And I'm just amazed and in wonder about how beautiful they are. I do think a lot of scientists who don't believe in God still see beauty there. I think it's just a matter of helping. Someone needs to help them recognize, I guess, that it's not. I don't know. It's a really tough question. I really come at it from the perspective that someone needs to have a personal relationship. God's going to be the one to help them discover that. I mean, we can work, we can be the catalyst there, but it's God that's going to reveal that to them.
This will probably jump us ahead a little bit, but I heard an evolutionary biologist try to explain why we have that sense of wonder and awe. And they said, if you look at it, when you go up to a valley and look out and it's beautiful, or you stand on top of a mountain and you're just enraptured, and most people make this as worshipful experiences, but they said, well, actually, maybe it's because evolutionarily, in order to survive, when you were at a high point, you had a better view of all the people that could attack you, or animals. So if a lion was going to come out and sneak out of the Saharan, if you were up on top of the mountain, you were safer. So therefore, that sense of wonder just got passed down evolutionarily. So I point that for your specific thing is, but this is what people do. And I like to say those are like the just so stories. Remember the just so stories? And that's how the leopard got his spots. Those are the old, like, superstitious stories. I believe that a lot of evolutionary stories like that are very superstitious. Okay, you've made that up. You have no way to test that or prove that. That's just your idea. Then the question, I think, comes into the certainty thing. So what is the most plausible explanation? Is this a sense of wonder that this is planned and beautiful and created by God of the universe? Because that's the sense I feel, and nearly everyone on the globe feels the same way because most people are religious in our world. Or is it this bizarre thing that we cannot test or prove? Well, I mean, you got to decide which is more plausible, I guess. You wouldn't, since we're talking about statistics, right? Okay.
Thank you for the good question.
Could everybody give a hand to Ryan? Thank you so much. So we'll do this for the next few weeks. If you have more questions, send them in. I'm going to say a prayer and we'll get out of here. Lord God, thank you so much for this night that we have talked a lot about questions and doubts, and I know there's some people in here that might have questions, and I pray that as they pursue the answers, that you would lead them more and more to you, because you are the author of both books, in the scriptures and the world around us. Lord, help them to study more so we could learn more about you and grow in faith and bolster that faith and move away from doubt and into deeper faith and stronger faith. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.